I'll get underway. Thank you so much for having me this morning. My name is Michael Wynne. I am the Digital Applications Librarian in the Center for Digital Scholarship and Curation at Washington State University. The majority of my work centers around Mukurtu CMS, providing support, training, outreach, and working otherwise with our development team. The Washington State University Pullman campus is located on the homelands of the Nunu Nez Perce tribe and the Palouse people, and we acknowledge their presence there since time immemorial and recognize their continuing connection to the land, the water, and their ancestors. I actually live in Victoria and Saanich, BC, up in Canada on the territories of the Lekwungen and Saanich peoples. I know we have time for questions at the end, but do feel free to have questions as we go. I'm more than happy to clarify anything as I'm underway. So, getting into Mukurtu is a free open source content management system and community access platform built with the needs of Indigenous communities in mind for curating, sharing, managing, and providing access to their digital cultural heritage materials. Our team at WSU, we develop and maintain the source code. We provide support, outreach, training. When it comes to implementation, there isn't like a single repository of all Mukurtu sites. It's something that each community is responsible for implementing on their own. And we can certainly talk about the technical implementation side of it later if people are interested. So Mukurtu is used primarily by Indigenous communities around the world, but other non-native, non-Indigenous user groups certainly use it as well. What it does primarily is it gives communities a tool to decide how to make their content available based on their own internal protocols for viewing and circulation of those materials. One really important note that I want to make sure I cover at the top is that Mukurtu has been developed and really works best when it's one part of a larger digital preservation ecosystem. Specifically, it's an access tool. So it's not the space where we'll be putting our highest resolution preservation files. It's most effective when it's used in conjunction with other digital preservation systems and services, which is something that will look different for everyone. But really, what we're focusing on, Mukurtu is a way to provide access. And speaking of access and what I mean by that, there are four main features, four core features that at this point set Mukurtu apart a fair bit from other platforms in the broad content management realm. I will note that when we talk about CMS, that can be content management or collections management. We also overlap with other museum, other cultural heritage content management tools, but Mukurtu tends to bridge a number of those in different ways. So the tools that we have in place that set Mukurtu apart from many of the other systems out there, the first and very much the biggest are cultural protocols. So these are this is the tool that allows for granular access to the content of a Mukurtu site. And when I talk about content, that can be cultural materials, language, photographs, documentation, whatever materials you're working with. And protocols are like the core thing that Mukurtu provides that we don't see as much elsewhere. The second really big thing is what we call community records. This is a way to provide multiple sets of metadata or knowledge or information or narratives for a given item and to push back on the concept of a singular canonical record. So a lot of our users work in the context where their cultural materials are held by an external institution or repository. So, a non-native museum or archive or library. We have their information, but it's of great value for the communities to be able to push, not just push, but to share and document their own experiences and knowledge in contrast and alongside those. The third tool that we have is actually a whole suite of tools that we call round trip. This is import and export. So this is the sort of more technical pieces that underpin digital return and digital exchange with other communities and other institutions. Mukurtu doesn't use any proprietary file format or encoding. Everything comes in through, at the moment, CSV spreadsheet files and media files and zip archives. So everything is in an accessible format. Anything that is put into a Mukurtu site you'll be able to retrieve that in the future in an accessible format. And the last sort of core tool are the TK or the traditional knowledge labels. The TK labels allow Indigenous communities to provide information about proper access and use of materials that are primarily in the public domain or owned by third parties. This is basically an extra legal set of educational tags to inform users about appropriate usage. This is a different set of tools from protocols, which really govern actual access. The TK labels are more about education and proper use. And I'll cover most of these, or at least some of these features, in a bit more depth as we go. So, before I actually show the platform itself and the tools, I do want to take a couple minutes and talk about where Mukurtu came from. I think it's really valuable to have that information to get the context of our priorities and our principles, because they shape not just the platform, but our philosophy, the way we provide support, and kind of all the different pieces. Basically, having the context of why Mukurtu works the way it does helps explain how it works. So, starting in about 1995, our director, Dr. Kim Kristen, had been working with the Warramungu Aboriginal community in Central Australia. Um, they had brought her in to help record and document songs and stories about their homelands, their traditions, their languages, with the express intent of passing those recordings on to their children, their grandchildren, and other future generations. They were really focusing at that time on audio and video of the places they were raised, the countries there, stories of their ancestors, songs about their country and their languages. That work is, that partnership is still ongoing as well. So that started again about 1995. Sort of next big jump to where we are going with Mukurtu was in about 2002. Those materials that Dr. Kristen helped document, along with other digital materials from scholars, missionaries, teachers, people who had spent time and lived and worked in the community, started being returned. So people started scanning photos. We started seeing more of a proliferation of digital cameras. Um, and in the course of the community working with those born digital and digitized files, it became evident that the way people interact with digital materials was different than physical materials. When folks are sitting around a physical photo or a physical object in a room, they would have a good sense of who should have access, who should be there, who should view it. But in terms of digital materials, that felt a little more tenuous. How did they ensure that the same protocols for viewing and circulation and attribution and access could be maintained in what feels like at times a much more ephemeral digital sphere? And this is actually, I love this photo. It's a great illustration of those physical protocols. This is a filing cabinet located at the Ninkanunu Art and Culture Center in Tennant Creek in Warramungu country in Australia. And we can clearly see that the access is restricted to men only. So within that community and a lot of Australian communities, gender-based access, men's and women's business is quite common. And that if somebody wants to access the materials in this cabinet, they have to get permission from Mr. Jones. So the question is, how do we take these face-to-face protocols that we all have in different senses for permission and access, and how do we translate those into a digital sphere when they're removed from that physical context? So that work led into what became the first version of Mukurtu. Michael Jumpin Jones, who's a community elder, he was working on that, and as the project developed, he chose Mukurtu as the name for the platform that he wanted to see created. So Mukurtu is a Warramungu word. It literally means dilly bag, and basically it's a traditional safekeeping place for cultural materials within the community. So with that concept of the dilly bag as a safekeeping place, that was the starting point that led to the first Mukurtu Archive for the Warramungu community. Now this launched in 2007. It was only accessible in person on the one computer at Ninkanunu. It was an isolated, one-off, custom little project that was built. And I say little project, lots of complexity behind it as well. So the very first version of what then grew into Mukurtu launched in about 2007. Jumping ahead, basically from then to here, a number of years, more and more people heard about how the Warramungu community was using the Mukurtu Archive, and basically wanted to be able to do something similar. So Mukurtu was shifted into other sort of different tech stacks and development, and it grew from that single unique offline tool to a more flexible, specifically a web-based platform, which has continued to grow since. So our team has the great privilege to work with many Indigenous, Native, First Nations communities as part of our development process. Their needs and feedback guide our development, our features, and our support. We don't just build tools because we think they're interesting. We build tools expressly to meet community requests and community needs. So from the very first days of Mr. Jones trying to implement that to how we continue to do our development today as we move forward. All right. If anyone has any questions about that, feel free to pipe up. Otherwise, I will move on to structure. So, again, I promise I will get to the platform itself in a couple moments. But first, I want to talk about the structure of a Mukurtu site a little bit, because again, this really informs the content. So each Mukurtu site will have three elements that provide the framework that we use to create, share, and describe the content. Those are communities, cultural protocols, and categories, or the three C's for short. I'll cover each of them in a little more detail in a moment, but as a brief overview, communities are the groups of users and contributors of the site. They are the who of Mukurtu. They help us identify where content, where knowledge, where information, where it comes from. Whether that's physical material, narratives, whatever we're talking about, who is contributing and who is accessing the site. Cultural protocols are the how. How does an individual user access specific content provided by contributors, provided by communities? Very importantly, each community within a site will create and manage their own protocols, and we'll see some examples of that in a moment. And categories are descriptive terms. They tell us what is on the site. They are generally a fairly small set of non-technical, non-jargon terms that help sort of the core site users find what they're looking for. How do we know what is on the site? To know what to look for. So in a little bit more detail, communities, again, represent the primary source of contribution and attribution for the content on the site. The site that I have up here is the Plateau People's Web Portal. This is a large collaborative project that we maintain here at Washington State University with currently eight of our local MOU tribes. I'll come back to this site for a number of examples because it's one that I can speak to quite well, but I'll pull some other examples as we go also. So within the scope of a Mukurtu site, a community it will vary. Each site will have as many structural communities as are needed. So, for example, a group of language speakers, a nation, a clan, a family, a repository holding material culture. Those could all be communities. Often we'll see on smaller sites that are run by a single tribe, they might only have a few communities that map to, say, contributing departments, the education department, language department, tribal administration programs might be their communities because each of those are responsible for contributing and managing their own content. And on the other side of the spectrum, a site can have a huge number of communities, especially in the Australian context. We often see sites mapped around families. So if a site has hundreds of families, we could see hundreds of Mukurtu communities. In this particular site, this is the front page of the portal. There's the 8 tribal nations reflected on the front page. They are each a community because they are all of the content in the site is going to be related to at least one of those tribal groups. Something that's not shown on the front page here, but we also have all of the non-native partner organizations who are contributing their metadata and their media, mostly federal repositories, but also local and regional repositories. Those are also communities. We don't foreground them in the same way, but they are contributing as well. Another piece that the communities lets us do is have basically a landing page for each of those communities. This is the Coeur d'Alene landing page on the portal. They have a contemporary banner up at the top, and then they've included text and audio welcomes. I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear my audio, but let's see if this plays for us. All right, so hopefully you could hear that. Either way, that was a welcome by Michelle Clark from the Coeur d'Alene tribe, welcoming folks to their community on the portal. So that is communities broadly. Oh, and the other thing that we can see on this page, apologies, is on the right side there is a protocol listed. This is the Coeur d'Alene Community Public Access Protocol. So when I took this screenshot, I was not logged in. I was visiting anonymously, and all I get to see is that there is a public protocol. I happen to know that there are more protocols within the site, but I will only see them if I have permission, which will pull us nicely into protocols. So protocols are, again, how individual users access specific content. I have a screenshot up here again of our filing cabinet example from earlier. I tend to talk about protocols as types of sharing rather than types of restricting access. Really, it's about how do we define appropriate access. And protocols are like the heart and soul of Mukurtu. They are what allow for the cultural values that we have offline to be embedded into a digital format. So, within a Mukurtu site, each community, each structural community will define their own set of protocols. Like communities are flexible, so are protocols. We don't have a predefined list that people choose from. When a protocol is created, whoever is setting it up will have to specify here is who should have access and here is what this protocol means. These are just examples of some common ones that we see sort of globally. Gender-based access, men's, women's business, seasonal. Out here, there's lots of communities that have things like winter songs or winter stories that are only accessible while snow is on the ground or something along those lines. Ceremonial, sacred, membership in a song troupe or initiation into a society. Material that's only accessible for enrolled tribal members or something like that. But ultimately, it's up to the communities to specify what their different users, what their different audiences are. One thing I really want to note is that this applies to public as well. If somebody wants to publish material publicly, meaning no login, no username required, you have to set up a public protocol to do that, and then, of course, apply that to items. Public access is not the default fallback. It is always an intentional decision that has to be made. And very importantly, different users will likely have access to different content within the site because different users will probably be enrolled in different sets of protocols. So if I log into the site one day, I'll see a certain set of items. Somebody else logs in, they will likely see a different set of items depending on what their protocol enrollment is and what they should have permission to access. So the last of our 3Cs, the last of our structural pieces are categories. And again, categories are descriptive. They serve as a discovery tool to organize and define the materials within the site. Again, it is flexible. We don't impose a set of terms to choose from. We don't default to, like Library of Congress subject headings or anything like that, any of the existing control vocabularies, because the scope of the content and the audience for each site will vary so much. I find that most sites end up with around 10 to 15 categories depending on their content and their user needs. They tend to be accessible terms. We try to avoid technical or academic jargon so that it is terms that the average user working with the site will be familiar with. Coming back to the Plateau portal as an example, we have 12 categories on this site, and this site includes material from museums, libraries, archives, language department, tribal cultural heritage department. So our scope of content is broad. Some of these are fairly self-explanatory. I would say artistry and artifacts, language is a good sense of what kinds of content are going to be within those. But others are a little more complicated. So on the right, we have this government-to-government relations category. This site contains things like treaty documents, censuses, Bureau of Indian Affairs reports. And when our tribal representatives were planning the site, they didn't just want to call those historical or government documents. They are sovereign nations with a nation-nation relationship with the U.S. federal government and wanted to be able to reflect that explicitly. So that term was chosen very, very deliberately. Just as another set of examples, this is the Hoona Heritage Foundation up in Alaska. Their site has 8 categories. Some are similar in scope to what we see on the portal, but others are much, much narrower. So they have a fishing category, the Hoona Fire of 1944. Hoona historically has a very pronounced fishing fleet. There was a fire in 1944 that burned down basically the entire village. So those are topics that people are always interested in finding, so they really wanted to foreground those. So together, those 3 elements, our 3Cs, are generally flexible enough to adapt to any situation, any context for somebody working with Mukurtu, and they form the foundation for any given Mukurtu site. Right. Any questions before I move on to content finally? Okay. So now that we talked about the structure, I want to talk about content. So I'm going to actually come back and show a whole load of examples around this. There's a number of different types of content within a site. The primary one that we work with in most sites is what we call digital heritage items. And digital heritage items are at their core some combination of, well, usually a combination of media and metadata, descriptive information. The media is optional. Often we do work with stuff where people are not publishing media files and just working with the descriptive information. But they again allow us to move beyond the notion of a single canonical item or record to incorporate more context, more relationships. And just as a note, we support a wide range of media formats. So image, audio, video, documents, and a wide range of specific file formats within that are all supported. Our metadata schema, for anyone who's curious about that, it's an extended Dublin core schema. We call it Mukurtu core, and we can certainly take a look if people are interested. So I would like to just jump over and show that live because I think it's a lot more interesting to take a look at it in action. So this is the Plateau People's Web portal that I showed a little bit earlier. I'm going to come back to this because it's a rich example that I can speak to well. This is a digital heritage item on that site. Up at the top, we have a title. It's identified here as a root gathering bag. Below that are two tabs, two independent records within this one item. This is that community records tool that I mentioned earlier. The one that we're looking at right now is from the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture. That's located in Spokane, Washington. They physically hold this basket, and they have provided the photo and the metadata that we're looking at here. So we have a photo of our basket. Below it, we have, a fairly basic physical museum description. Round twine cylindrical bag, a bit about the materials, the dimensions. It's fine. We have communities and protocols identified, and in this case, both the museum and the tribe, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, are listed here because the museum has contributed this metadata record, but it's important that we affiliate and attribute this record to the tribal community that produced the basket itself. Both of those communities have specified a protocol. In this case, they are both public access. I won't show you anything that's not publicly accessible. And it's in our artistry and artifacts category. So that's our structural pieces, our 3Cs. Every item is going to have those. At least one community, at least one protocol, and at least one category. The rest of the metadata here is not terribly interesting, to be fairly honest. We have a date range. We have a sort of culture group creator statement from the museum. We have the museum rights statement and identifier. And overall, it's fine. I would consider this a fairly sparse record, but it is representative of often what we see coming out of repositories who are, not necessarily experts in all the cultures that they work with. However, the people who are experts are members of the affiliated tribe. So in this case, I'm going to move over to this record from the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, and we'll take a look at what they had to add to this. The photo hasn't changed. We're still talking about the same basket. We've added an additional title. It's a Wascleman basket, not a root gathering bag. The museum has, I don't know how many dozens or hundreds of root gathering bags. We can get much more specific. This record within the item is only attributed to the Warm Springs community, so the information that we're looking at now is solely coming from the tribe, not from the museum. Still being shared publicly, still in the artistry and artifacts category, but everything else is going to be different from here on out. We have a series of keywords. Sally bag, deer design, dye, Wascleman, much more detailed than what we were able to get from the museum. We have three contributors. Maxine Switzler, Arlita Roan, and Valerie Switzler are all Warm Springs tribal members. Two of them, Maxine and Arlita, have passed away since this record was made a number of years ago. But they are the three women who created this record. They came up with that title. They provided those keywords. They have given us a much more detailed cultural narrative, so they are all expert weavers and can speak in much more depth about the materials and the design. And they also work to produce a video. I'm just going to play a couple of moments of this since I'm not sure how my system audio is coming through. But I want to at least give it a shot. All right, so we have Arlita speaking in Etruscan, one of the Warm Springs languages there. She does continue that for quite a bit and then transition to English and give a little more context about the basket later. I'll make sure I include a link so anybody can go ahead and view this, listen to that on your own as well, and that can be included with the presentation too. I'll just send that right now before I forget. So that is a lot of the basics of Mukurtu. So that is pulling up our 3Cs, our structure, our background, our context, and digital heritage items, which form, again, our sort of primary content within the site. Does anyone have any questions about any of that so far? The next thing I want to show, if no one does have questions, is just I want to show language-specific use within Mukurtu in a couple of different ways that we approach that. Okay, so we do have language-specific tools within Mukurtu, and I'm going to show them, but I also want to show language incorporation across sites as a whole. Language and culture are inextricably linked. We can't really pull them apart. So it's important that we don't have here's the material culture and here's the language. They're not separate things, as I'm sure we all will understand. Before I dive into that, just a quick note that across the board, Mukurtu uses Unicode UTF-8 character encoding, so any use of supported keyboards characters should be good. It's not something we've come across a lot of issues with, but a good note. So one example that we have here, this is the Passamaquoddy people site. They are in Maine, in the U.S. They've included both a text and audio welcome in Passamaquoddy language right on their front page. So you can see it written out there. Welcome to the Passamaquoddy People's Knowledge Portal. Let's play their welcome. That's Dwayne Thomas from the tribe. With the Passamaquoddy welcome. They've also included sort of on their sort of about more welcome page a lot more detail. So here they've included both audio recordings, English, and then interlinear translations in Passamaquoddy to give context about their collections, their materials, their land, their relationships with neighboring tribes, and their ancestors. So incorporating a lot of that language material. We really want it to be sort of upfront, but still accessible to a wide range of users. Moving back over to the Plateau People's Web Portal, this is another digital heritage item. This is a video of Virginia Beavert from the Yakama Nation, speaking actually again in Ichiskeen about the importance of education. I'm not going to play this video right now, but one thing they've included is again, sort of below the video, they've included both English. Well, again, she's speaking in Ichiskeen. They've included an Ichiskeen transcription with translation into English as well. This text is also fully indexed in search, so users browsing or searching will be able to search in English or in Ichiskeen and come across the contents of this record. This is another language-based digital heritage item on the Plateau People's Web Portal. There's a lot going on here, so let me step through what's happening. The first thing is that this is what we call multi-page document. So this is what the Coeur d'Alene tribe calls their Green Book. It's one of their sort of go-to language learning resources that they have. So they digitized a lot of these books, and what they're doing is, if you can probably see up at the top, they have scanned the book as 2-page spreads. So you can actually view the previews of those pages and the previews of those pages and jump from page to page. Then further down the page, where we have the orange arrow there, within each of these 2-page spreads, we have the visual image of the page and then corresponding audio files. So in this case, they had one of their language speakers go and record all of the language on each of these pages. So you can view the text and listen to the audio at the same time as you're working through it. So this is actually a really, really involved record to put up that has, the whatever 84 double page spreads along with the one image and usually 2 or 3 audio files for each page. It's actually a really, really complex item, but it was important for them to be able to basically view it as a book and incorporate the visual representation and certainly the recordings on the site. This is again from Coeur d'Alene. They're one of our most active communities on the portal with language work. This is a 1935 recording of Lawrence Nicodemus, who is a Coeur d'Alene tribal member, reading a story called Cricket Rides Coyote. In this case, the item itself is pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of detail here. We have a title and a brief description. I'm just going to play a couple quick moments of the clip. So that's actually heavily cleaned up. Again, that recording is from 1935, and that's about as processed as it can get. So what they did as they were working on some language projects is members of the Coeur d'Alene Language Department re-recorded it. So they have contemporary recordings of the same story to accompany that. And then they worked with students, in this case students at WSU, to produce a couple animations to go along with it. And I'll just play a couple moments of it as a comparison. So that use of original source material, updated contemporary recordings, and sort of building on it is something that we see communities doing quite a lot of. On the portal, we have other examples of I think it's recordings from the Library of Congress that the Yakama Nation was working with their dance troops to sort of reinvigorate and revitalize. And again, you can have those side by side, or you can listen to the original recording and then sort of the contemporary version and the modern dance with it. Some really lovely work there. So that's all sort of language pieces broadly within digital heritage items and other structural pieces of the site. We do have other language specific tools. The biggest one that we talk about is usually our dictionary. And I mean, to me, dictionary is a little bit of a tricky term. It's not just words, people use it for phrases and morphology and other pieces as well. But in consultation with our community members, people generally know what to expect when they see the term dictionary, and folks generally felt that it was a fine term to work with. So we added the dictionary tool a number of years into the project. It came after digital heritage items had been around for a number of years, because our digital heritage metadata and display just didn't meet the needs of language educators and learners. They needed something more granular, more oriented around language specifically. So this is the browse page for the dictionary on the Plateau People's Web portal. Just to give a sort of quick overview orientation to it, users can sort by term or translation. So, most people are entering a bilingual dictionary, so you can choose which language you want to search by. One site can contain multiple languages. So again, this site has 8 tribal nations, each of which most of them have multiple distinct languages or dialects. And again, our language dialect distinction can get a little complicated sometimes, but you can have multiple languages represented within the site. There's other ways to describe and filter our content. Part of speech, we can build word lists to group items together. And then, of course, you can just do text search either in any language that your site is representing. Below that, a way to sort of filter your dictionary results by first letter, fairly standard stuff there. And then you get a preview of the words that match your search results. So here we have the term. In this case, this is Nitchin, which is the Coeur d'Alene language. They've included their English translations. You can listen to some of the recordings right from this sort of landing page, and you can see the name of the speaker for each of those recordings alongside, which is really important. I'm going to show more of the dictionary pieces in a moment. I just want to orient ourselves here. This site is Wheelquebjigan. This is run by the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians. Wheelquebjigan translates as sacred bundles, very similar to Mukurtu, the dilly bag concept. They've also incorporated language right into the site name and into their welcome and all of those pieces as well. So in their dictionary, you can see here, this is again just that landing page, but you can see that they have, we've dropped down the word list. So they've got 2 of their word lists are actually arranged by speaker. So Jim Thunder and Joseph Barasa are really significant members of their language community. So they want to be able to find all of their recordings together. This is just another way to group our language content within the site. So jumping into a dictionary word, and this one isn't terribly rich in some ways, but we've got our term in language up top. We have our recordings, we have our translations. The thing that I want to highlight here is relationships, though. For example, this word, it's the Potawatomi word for carp. They have as shown here on the right side, a poster of a whole bunch of local fish. Again, certainly all in Potawatomi. So you can actually jump right from this record into that digital, or right from this word into that digital heritage item, because somebody said, hey, these are connected. And in this case, they've actually connected all of their fish terms as well. So that's what our related dictionary words are down here. Odds are, if someone's curious about this term, they probably want to be able to access the others. And this is these are all bidirectional relationships. So I'm going to look at that fish poster. So now we're on a digital heritage item, and I can see down at the bottom that I've got all of the connected dictionary words related to this item as well. Again, if I'm here, I probably want to be able to just listen to the recordings of those words without having to navigate across the site to find them. So they're all connected. Building those relationships between words, between digital heritage items, between words and digital heritage items is something that's really essential for rich use of the site. The last thing that I just want to show about the dictionary here is some of the additional fields. So in this case, Pokagon have included sample sentences, both in Potawatomi and English. Those can also be audio recordings. In this case, it's text, but you can incorporate audio there as well. Yeah. So the last thing that I want to say before wrapping up is just talking a little bit about where Mukurtu is going. I will keep this fairly brief. So without getting into too much technical detail, we are in the middle of a major Mukurtu overhaul. We are currently working on Mukurtu CMS 4. That's going to be the upcoming version. It's going to be on the Drupal 9 framework. We're currently on Drupal 7. We'll be releasing that later this year. The main reason I'm bringing this up right now is that expanding our language capacity and our language tools is a big priority. It's something that, frankly, has been a little bit stagnant for us. We've obviously got those tools, but there's so much more that we want to and are going to be capable of supporting after this big update. We have a public discussion space for people where we're encouraging folks to submit feature requests and give us feedback so that we can hopefully incorporate more of those features from the jump. So some of the areas that we are planning to build out in terms of language specifically, we're going to maintain all our existing language support and functionality. Nothing's going away. We're just going to be enriching it. We're looking at improving localization. So really, sites right now, all of the main navigation stuff is kind of by default English. So we are going to have better support for localization, multilingual sites. Haven't determined the details yet, but it could be pre-built language packs, or it could be custom per site. That's all sort of on the table at this point. We're going to be expanding the dictionary and adding other language tools, but the biggest thing is really how do we do better for multilingual sites, and that's going to be a high priority for us as we get further into that aspect of the development. So if anyone is interested in learning more about Mukurtu or using it, reach out to our support email, support@mukurtu.org, or visit us, mukurtu.org or mukurtu.org/support. All of our support and training resources are publicly available, videos, articles. Basically, if you're interested in seeing how to do things on Mukurtu, that's all publicly accessible. So I encourage folks to reach out there, but otherwise certainly give us a shout, and we're more than happy to talk about any questions that people have. So thank you so much for listening to all of that today. And I'd love to switch over to questions and everything.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Very, very informative. We learned a lot of stuff. Thank you so much. I'm pretty sure we'll have some questions. Who wants to go first?
I'll start. You have a lot of information that people have contributed there, and I wonder how you deal with maintaining all of this information going forward, backups, and other just regular long-term storage considerations. I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Thanks. I noticed that right as I started talking. Great question. And I mean, the short answer is it depends, which is not terribly helpful, but it's the honest one. So I did mention up at the top that our team at WCU, we maintain the source code. By and large, barring explicit agreements and partnerships that we have, we don't host sites for people. So implementation of a Mukurtu site, if somebody wants to run Mukurtu, they have to do that themselves. We certainly can provide guidance. So what that usually means, and we have more detail, of course, about this on the site, primarily in our FAQ section. So Mukurtu is a server-level platform. It's not something that you install on a desktop. It is server-based for web access. So there's generally two pathways that folks will follow. The first is if they have the internal resources to run the required tech stack themselves, which is not trivial. That requires both the physical infrastructure and the IT server administration personnel skills. They can take our source code and go ahead and install it, run it on their own, in which case, yes, maintaining backups and all of that is hopefully something that is scoped within the realm of what their IT folks running it are already doing. The other option for the great number of folks who don't have that capacity to do that internally is to pay a third party vendor to host the site for them. Generally speaking, those vendors that type of backup and those systems are part of part of those service level agreements and those contracts. So that's certainly something that people would want to consider when choosing a vendor or when having those conversations internally. Is what are our fail safes and our backups in case those things happen. The other piece related to that I touched on up front is that Mukurtu is an access platform. So the files that are going up are, for the most part, at least my recommendation is not high resolution preservation files. It is not the singular place to keep one copy of everything. It is the place where you're putting your derivative or derived access copies for a couple of reasons. One, just storage. It's expensive to host preservation files online when that's something that's better maintained in an internal system. Also, delivering to users, the sending out or giving users access to extremely high resolution materials can be a huge issue in communities that have limited bandwidth. So that piece, the sort of broader digital preservation piece, where are you keeping your originals and other things like that, it's a little bit outside of Mukurtu specifically. Happy to get into it if you want, but does that address your question a bit?
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. It looks like Claudio has a question.
Yes, very comprehensive presentation. Congratulations, Mike. My question is more or less the following. You explain Mukurtu as a content management system. Sure. And here in our university, the situation is more or less, to say in a few words, a sort of sparse situation, because we have information science department who in general deals with the content management system, but I work for the Institute of Languages. And here we have a laboratory, language and literature indigenous laboratory, where more or less the people who work there, to simplify, are linguistic people. They go to the communities, they collect information, etc. And there is another dimension, is the museological dimension. My question is more or less the following. In Washington State University, this sort of holistic concept of CMS, will it a way of combining all these dimensions such a way that you can repositories, you can have databases, you can have all this combined in such a way that the user can more or less see it more easily, while we all understand there is a sort of technological iceberg behind it. Can we put it in these words?
Yeah, so can Mukurtu, or frankly, could any content management system serve as a unifying tool to pull all of those distributed pre-existing systems together for like a single access point for users? The short answer is probably not, to be completely honest. And I'll just say, I hate the term CMS because it means content management, it means collection management, and each of those have their own meanings. It is such a overly general acronym. So to that, I'll say I don't necessarily want to say every department, but every field, there's so many different needs that are tied up in all these pieces. Archives, they want their collection management systems that allow them to do processing and tracking, and the libraries have their own set of needs. When we're talking about broadly cultural heritage, it's different sets. So to be honest, I have yet to come across any system that hits all of those needs well. So internally at WSU, our manuscripts, archives, and special collections department uses Content DM for primarily for their digital collections. We use Mukurtu for specific projects. We're not trying to build a single, this is the WSU Mukurtu site. It's each community that we're working with or supporting, they're going to have their own, because it is a space for them to pull their materials wherever those are. So what we might see is, a community working with materials that are coming from the language laboratories and coming from the archives and the museums and being pulled into a Mukurtu site. I think it would be an enormous undertaking to truly do for an institution a single unified access point. I wouldn't even know where to start with that, to be honest. Really great question, and we all want that one tool that does everything, and I don't think it's out there at this point. So.
I think maybe I'm up next. I'm not sure.
Sue Ellen, you're next.
On that thought, Claudia's question about we talk about silos. I don't know whether you use that image in Placer, but we our university, and maybe this is something that happens in other North American universities, is very keen to break down the silo effect, and there are often competitions for combined departments and institutes to go together to try to apply for grants or to try to set up working environments. I know my own department, I come out of a department of applied linguistics that teaches translation and terminology management, and we work closely with the psychology department because we're interested in empirical studies. We work with definitely very closely with the computer science department and definitely with the information science department and library science. We haven't worked so closely with musicology, but if we were doing something like this, that would make great sense, as would we've got actually 2 schools of anthropology. So I don't know whether there are any models in other countries for doing this, but a lot can be achieved. I agree. I used to talk about the great global glossary in the sky, that you can't have a content management system that will do everything for everyone. But pulling in experts from these different areas can be extremely constructive when you're doing something. You have a project that doesn't fit easily in one rubric, and that you don't want to wall itself off from one rubric. I guess that's just a comment. I don't know whether Michael wants to reflect on that. I have another comment I want to make, but it's unrelated.
Just a really brief note. Again, I think, coming from my perspective, around Mukurtu and around the communities that are primary focus. Again, lots of folks work with the platform, but our core audience being Indigenous users. Ultimately, that's our focus. Is those are our primary users? Is Indigenous communities. So, how do I put this? In terms of the types of community-oriented or projects and efforts that I work on, the ones that are successful are the ones that are community-initiated, community-led, or in which the nations are pulled in from the very beginning and have oversight in the direction of it. What does not work, in my experience, is generally well-meaning academics like us at repositories or institutions saying, I'm going to build this thing and disseminate it to the community.
Yep.
If the community is not an active partner in the planning, development, request, the needs for it, you're not going to get buy-in, and frankly, that can be problematic in very many ways and perpetuate a lot of the challenges that we try to approach. So I think the question about interdepartmental and institutional collaboration, all that is phenomenal, and certainly something that I'd love to see more of institutionally. It is, I'm not going to say at odds with Mukurtu, but Mukurtu is not the tool for that, probably. Yeah.
Well, and if it's community oriented, the community is quite devoid of these silos. The community is amorphous and what's the word I want? It's holistic, and it doesn't. As a consequence, if the community comes to you, do you find yourself going to other departments to say, "Hey, I've got this excellent expert over here in musicology who might be able to help us with some of these files and help us categorize them"? Does that happen?
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
we
not
all
necessarily
in
that
our environment.
explicitly, but a big piece of what this leads into is relationship building. I mean, that is the core of all of this. So I showed the Plateau People's Web Portal. There's 8 tribes. There's one department at the university here. There's 3 or 4 federal repositories. There's a handful of other local and regional repositories involved. It's taken years. The site went live, the first version of it, I think 12 years ago. The project has been in the works for much longer than that. Originally, it was 3 nations participating, because all of this is about building trust and building relationships. So very much, if I'm working with, I'll just pull Coeur d'Alene again as an example because I showed a number of their items. If we're working with Coeur d'Alene on the items that they have in our manuscript archives and special collections, we will absolutely, if they seem to have any interest in working with other departments, whether it's, we have someone in musicology or anthropology department say, hey, I know that someone has relevant materials there. We will absolutely make those connections and leave it up to the community to sort of, drive that conversation about what they want out of those and also how they can in many ways contribute back. And that's always, yeah, relationship building. Absolutely. And that is really the heart of so much of this kind of work.
What about outside the university? My mind is just wandering around here. Our anthropology department is kind of world famous because Owen Lovejoy it was the one who identified some of the very very early fossils of humanoids, and he works. It's not just the anthropology department at Kent State. He works closely with the Cleveland Natural History Museum. So there are many of the items that might be studied or used are not housed permanently at Kent State. They end up in the collection of the Natural History Museum, rather than in a place where they are curated and then does this kind of thing, or are these things staying, and this is a good thing in our environment, in the hands of the peoples, that they maintain their own curation of physical objects?
Yes, no, and more. One
Say
of the
it,
great,
Brenda.
yeah, one of the great things about a platform like this is it allows for materials that are not physically co-located to be pulled together and have and be placed in cultural
Yeah,
context,
right.
and curated in the cultural context by the source communities, because lots of times we'll see, a community builds a collection on their site of, for example, basketry of their materials that are held across the world, pulling those digital materials together and saying, these are physically separated by hundreds and thousands of kilometers, but we want to display them together because that is how that is their context. So, every community project is so unique in its needs, but most of them pull from multiple sources, from materials that are held within their community by individuals, by internal tribal departments, as well as pulling materials from partner organizations elsewhere. So most sites, I would say, are doing some degree of pulling from a range of different physical sources and partnerships. Again, every project is going to have a different focus, but that's very very common.
And just one last comment, and then I'll shut up and let somebody else talk. This is just a comment. I was very pleased with the way you demonstrated your metadata. I can remember a couple cases where I got a lunch into a discussion of metadata, and everybody's eyes glazed over, and they said, "Let's not go there." But you presented it in a nice, straightforward way. I trust that there are probably some more complicated areas of metadata that you get into, but this is a nice, very nice presentation of what you can do with metadata.
Yeah, and of course, depending on other questions, I'd be more than happy to show a closer look at our sort of full schema. But an important note there is, we work with Dublin Core, we've extended it, but ultimately people work with the fields that are most relevant. So, projects that are working closely with records coming out of, primarily external repositories that have structured metadata, that'll be displayed, but for the community-generated materials, they're not going to use subject headings for the most part because that's not relevant to how they work with it. They'll work with the keywords and the people field and cultural narrative fields. So we have those different layers available depending on the use case. But if
I work directly with Dublin Core too, so I know where you're coming from.
It's an approachable one.
Yeah. I was in on the early days when they started developing it decades ago. So.
Julie.
Yes, thank you, Michael, for this presentation. I think that it's worth noting, excuse me if you already did note it, that your source code is provided for free to communities, and and then people need to find a place to host the and make the site. Can you say a little bit about, have people, is that has that been a bumpy ride for people to figure out how to host and stuff, or is that pretty smooth?
Yeah, huge question. So yes, all of our past, present, and future source code is open source. It's publicly available in our GitHub repository. You don't have to register or sign up or seek approval from us to access it. So we really don't want to be a barrier to people who want to use the platform. It's a little tricky because we have no way to track how many downloads or instances there are, but not being, removing that barrier to access is much more important. In terms of technical implementation, it's not trivial. Like I said, it does require, if an organization, community or otherwise, are doing it internally, it requires resources. And that is, again, physical resources in terms of server and connectivity, and the personnel who are able to run that. So, yes, there are absolutely folks who have not gone with Mukurtu, or potentially, I'm not sure, other platforms, because they are not comfortable using a third-party vendor. Absolutely understandable. Again, I think there's lots of good ones out there, but ultimately that does require relying on somebody else's infrastructure and in a contract. So we absolutely come across cases where communities are not comfortable doing that, and they simply don't have the internal capacity to run it themselves, and we don't have a backdoor option for that. It's complex systems, and it does require a degree of implementation. So yeah, absolutely, there are folks who have had either a very long road in having internal decisions and discussions about what is acceptable and what they end up doing for implementation. Other people have had those conversations and said, yeah, we need to run it internally, but we simply don't have the capacity. And certainly we'll provide what guidance we can, but if you don't have someone with the IT skills to do it, there isn't a quick way to run it. It's not a simple install there. So often what we see then is for people who do end up saying, well, we want to do something, we can't do it ourselves internally, we'll go with a third-party vendor. That in many ways will guide at least the initial scope of the project. We're going to work with materials that are already publicly accessible, or that don't have any sensitivities, because we want to do some work around it and have some presence, but there's a scope of materials that we're not comfortable putting online, and that is important to have those decisions as well. I mean, ultimately, there are absolutely communities who say, yeah, we're going to use Mukurtu, we're going to host ourselves, great, we'll put most of it up, but there's a set of items that we're never going to put up, no matter what. No matter how good we feel the system is and trusted, we're still not going to work with it, and I absolutely support that. Ultimately, there's also going to be folks who say, there's a set of items that we're not even going to digitize because they're sufficiently sensitive that, yeah, don't. If that is important, don't do it. So yes, it's non-trivial to implement on a technical level internally. Other option being third-party vendors. So most folks do have to have conversations about that, about choosing a trusted vendor, looking into their internal capacity, or other partnerships. Sometimes people will be able to work with an institution that maybe they have a good working relationship with, who can provide hosting for them or something like that. So there's other ways to get to it. But yes, for many people, it ultimately is an issue. And unfortunately, one that we don't have a good way around, because we are in the realm of complex systems and tech stacks. So there is going to be a degree of requirements there. Yeah.
By the way, I do indeed think that this is going to be a presentation that we want to have out there. Do it with prescient in her.
I have a quick question.
Please.
I hope. In your presentation, you showed languages that are using Latin characters, and you gave an alphabetic index that included A through Z.
Yeah.
Is it built into Mukurtu to handle other writing systems, such as Canadian syllabics?
Yeah. So again, I mean, the two requirements being Unicode supported and obviously having a compatible font to display. So our default font at the moment is, I believe, Helvetica New. That's our go-to standard system font. It is not, it doesn't cover every language. It's got quite broad scope, but it's easy enough for somebody to implement something else. And we may switch in the future. Actually, on my list for Mukurtu 4 is, I think I want to push us to go to BC Sans, which is actually a font developed by the provincial government here in British Columbia, which was designed to cover all the languages used in the province. So it's got massively wide scope, and they've done a lot of good work in developing it. So on that front, if somebody is working with a Unicode supported language and our default font doesn't work, it's a fairly trivial. That can be changed. Somebody could switch to a different font if needed. In terms of the character entry, yeah, as long as it's Unicode 8 compliant, you can do that. So the dictionary, like that alphabet ordering is actually, I believe, I would have to double check, but I believe that is going to be basically in Unicode order by default. So A to Z, and for English lines up with Unicode sequential numbers. I would imagine it's the same for other languages, but you can also manually reorder them. So yeah, you can say yes. You can. The system will pull the first letter of the word automatically and put that into the glossary. There's settings to either pad or not pad out with missing, with non-represented letters. There's a lot of settings around that for controlling it. So the short answer is yes. That should all be displayable. We haven't gone through every single scenario. I have done tests with syllabics. They display and work fine, but not like in-depth work with it myself. So short answer, should be good, but would absolutely be phenomenal to have some folks who are more familiar with those other different systems and scripts do some more detailed testing with us. Yeah.
I'll follow up a little bit. The examples you showed were almost all North American languages. Do you have experience with languages of South Asia or Abogidas?
Not hands-on myself. I know. Can I find it quickly? There is a Thai group that has done a site, and they did a fair bit of translation work and localization for there. I'm just trying to see if I can find it quickly. I don't recall the URL off the top of my head, but yeah, Thai is the biggest one that I've come across in terms of other implementations. Again, unless people contact me, I don't know about their sites. So likely, yes, other languages and other scripts, certainly non-North American, have been used. That's just the one that comes to mind that I've seen a handful of times. I would imagine there's others, but none who have worked with us directly.
Okay.
Again, people don't have to work with us directly. So.
Sure. And one quick note, you mentioned Unicode 8. I think we're currently working on Unicode 14. Is there a reason that you said Unicode 8, or are there restrictions?
Honestly, not off the top of my head. I will be looking into that and seeing where we're at with that. My guess is at the time this was developed, and again, the development predates me, is that had probably the broadest support. But I'll need to take a look and see what we're looking at for that going at the moment.
The reason I'm asking is that a lot of the languages that are coming online now are using scripts that are fairly recently added to Unicode. It means fonts aren't widely available yet, and then indexing systems get complicated for other writing.
Gotcha.
And
I will be putting that on our internal development list for our next meeting to check where we are at on that. So it's a very good reminder.
Those are the things I work with on a daily basis and fight with at Google. So that's why I ask.
Yeah, I will look into it and find out more. That's to some extent beyond my technical knowledge in a lot of ways. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Any more questions? Any more comments? No, Michael, this has been an amazing presentation. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
please.
Oh, I was just gonna say thank you so much for inviting me. And should anybody want to reach out either through, directly to us through support or through internal channels, please do. Always here to answer questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And see you next month. Bye bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.